And I think that was almost a bit of a wake-up call of you've got to respect the training and the recovery, and there's a time and a place to kind of say yes to everything and have a busy life alongside training. But I definitely got to the point in London where I was like, now I need to just head down and start getting my recovery a little bit better. The main benefit of altitude is you get more red blood cells, so you've got less oxygen at altitude, so your body creates more red blood cells to basically help transport oxygen to your muscles.
It was like, this is meant to be fast. Like, it's going to feel uncomfortable, and that's how it's meant to feel. Which actually did help, because during it I'd be like, okay, this hurts, but this is good, I want it to hurt. And he was like, yeah, the one thing you can control is just giving it your best on the day. Welcome back to 5 Miles Easy. On today's episode, we're going to have a bit of a catch up on what we've both been up to over the last few weeks, training wise. Rose is out in Font Romeu training, and I am still in London, but I've been mixing up the type of training I've been doing. So Rose, let's just get straight into it. Where are you and what are you doing there at the moment?
I am up in the Pyrenees in a tiny ski town called Font Romeu. It's altitude, so up here for 6 weeks actually, getting a really good altitude block in. And Font is just literally one of my favourite places in the world to train. I absolutely love it. It is very low-key, very just French, and lots of really lovely trails and a great loop around a lake which we use for tempo training. So got a great setup here. A couple of guys I train with at home have come out as well. Charlie's out with me, and yeah, training so far is going well.
It must be nice to have people from home who you trust with pacing and everything, so you've got a bit of the home comfort, but at the same time kind of removing yourself from that London life, because it can get really busy, can't it? So have you found it's been really good for you to kind of get that space in a different location?
Definitely. I think before I came out here, the few weeks leading up to my Manchester 10K, which I will touch on in a minute, were so hectic, and I just felt like my body was so on edge. My recovery was terrible because I was just legging it from A to B every day, and then just, I don't know, quite stressed with everything. Not that I had anything massively stressful going on, but just such a busy schedule. And so I definitely got to going out to Font thinking, oh my gosh, I need to just sleep for a week. But 2 days in, after really good sleep, it makes such a big difference. And I think, just to touch on Manchester, I went there and I didn't have a great race. I just felt so tired, and actually I was really annoyed because I went into that race thinking I'm in good shape, my training sessions had gone really well, and I raced it last year, and actually in training I was doing much better than I was when I raced last year. So on paper I should have been in pretty good PB shape, but honestly I was just so tired. And I think that was almost a bit of a wake-up call of you've got to respect the training and the recovery, and there's a time and a place to kind of say yes to everything and have a busy life alongside training. But I definitely got to the point in London where I was like, now I need to just head down and start getting my recovery a little bit better. So that's partly why Font has been so good, because it is just really focused training time up here. There are no distractions. It's a lot quieter than London. Very, very quiet. But it does mean that you get all the little things done, all the rehab, physio. I've even had a couple of naps, which is basically unheard of for me. So that's been great. And yes, net, feeling a lot better, in a lot better place, which is good. And interestingly, one thing I've noticed, I am a little bit obsessed with HRV, which I check every day. HRV, I'm sure a lot of people know this already, but it's a really good metric to see how you're recovering from training. And basically you want your HRV to be as high as possible. So before Manchester, mine was terrible, which was also stressing me out. A bit of a vicious circle there of, feeling stressed, low HRV, bad sleep, and then getting stressed about not sleeping well. And then literally 2 days into Font, it was great again. So I think the Font magic works.
Yeah, that's so good. It sounds like the Manchester race, even though you were obviously disappointed with it, it came at a really good time because it wasn't too late in your training block where there's nothing you can do about it. You still got so much time where you realise, okay, yeah, like we can't continue like this. So let's make a few changes. And then, I mean, it sounded like it didn't take very long, only a couple of days after getting to Font, that you suddenly felt a lot better. So yeah, that must be really promising.
Yeah, exactly. I think, it was, obviously you want to do well in every race, but it wasn't exactly my A race. So I was annoyed about it, but it's one of those things. It's like, okay, done it, get back out there the next day and move on and just learn from it. And I definitely learned some good lessons. So overall, a positive experience, but I think a lesson that just listen to your body and don't be afraid to say no to a few things if it's getting a bit much.
So Font Romeu is also at altitude. So how high up are you and why are you at altitude at this point in your training block?
Font Romeu is about 1,800 metres. We're staying at about 1,800 metres. The track is also up that high, and then the lake where we do a lot of the tempos is down a little lower. So it's altitude, but it's not super high. I've trained a lot higher, and I actually love the altitude of Font because it's not too hard on your body. It's the sort of place you can do 6 weeks and it's not going to take so much out of you. And it's good timing for me because I quite like to spend some time at altitude. As we spoke about in our previous catch up, the main benefit of altitude is you get more red blood cells. So you've got less oxygen at altitude, so your body creates more red blood cells to basically help transport oxygen to your muscles, and so that helps you be more efficient, run more efficiently. I quite like doing altitude and then having a bit of a block at sea level, so you can basically use those red blood cells to hit some really good sessions at sea level before your race. So that's basically what I'm doing before Paris, out in Font Romeu for 6 weeks, and then I'll go back to sea level to do the final touches, the final few really big workouts before heading to Paris. So that's basically my plan. And along with the altitude, Font is great because it's in the mountains. So it's hilly, and so we're also getting some good hill training in.
Which is very necessary, as we both saw the course in Paris a few weeks ago, and there is one hill in particular that is very steep.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of it, honestly, just after a couple of weeks in Font, I feel like because all the runs are not super hilly, but they're not flat. I know you spoke about this when you were in Cape Town. It just changed your perception, and now I don't even really notice the little undulations. And so I do think it's kind of changed my perspective for the better on hills, whereas London, as we know, is a pretty flat place, and you go up the hill in Richmond and think it's really big. Whereas now that's like every easy run is kind of like that. So it's really good prep, both kind of physically and mentally for the Paris hills.
Yeah, I think it is such a psychological thing, isn't it? Because it's just when you see a hill coming up in front of you, it's like not being daunted by it and just knowing you can get up it with no issue, rather than seeing one and being like, oh my God, it's so much effort to get up this hill, and then you go into it with the wrong attitude, I think. So yeah, it's good to just feel used to them, I think.
Exactly, and I think just not worrying too much about pace as well, because you got to accept you're going to be a bit slower up the hills, and that's fine.
So how's the training actually been going?
It's been going well. I've now done one long run session, one track session, one hill session, and a steady long run out here. So that's been the sessions I've done. The first session I did was actually the long run workout, which was hard. It was only 3 or 4 days into altitude, so definitely felt the lack of oxygen in that. And at altitude, you often feel it on the longer tempos. The longer tempos are really hard. The short track stuff, you are more out of breath, but you can recover and it's not quite so brutal. But the long tempos are tough. So that was a little bit of a baptism of fire, but it went well. We were happy with it. And then we had a good track session the other day, getting some speed work in. As I mentioned, the hills, definitely getting used to that. And then a good steady long run, which is actually my longest run of the block so far. So we did 2 hours 30, 24 miles. And yeah, it felt good. So so far, Font is treating me well. And it's just, I think with the altitude, it definitely is harder at sea level, but it's also just kind of adjusting your mindset. Again, it's just getting used to that discomfort. And a lot of the time, especially with the shorter sessions, you feel really out of breath, but it doesn't get any worse. You'll go around and you feel that like shortness of breath in your chest, but it stays like that. So if you can just accept it and get through it, you're fine.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And when it comes to sessions, does your coach give you target splits to hit, or how do you adjust the pace for each type of session when it comes to altitude? So I guess it's different when you're doing 400s versus when you're doing a longer tempo. Like, how would you do a marathon pace effort at altitude?
My coach does give me targets, but I get a range at altitude because it is a lot more effort based. A couple of reasons. Firstly, the long loop we do isn't completely flat. So the one side of it is uphill, the other side is downhill. So your splits are kind of all over the place. But the other thing is at altitude, if you push it a little bit too hard and really bury yourself, it's quite hard to come back, which in marathon pace sessions, if you cook yourself on the first quarter, then it's not great. So I get a range of paces, which is usually for the long tempo kind of 5 to 10 seconds slower than sea level. And that does normally feel about right.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. And good to know, actually, because I've never properly trained at altitude. So I will remember that. So when this comes out, will it be 8 weeks to go until Paris? It's like a couple months now.
Yeah, so exactly. Yeah, it'll be 8 weeks, which is coming around so quickly. I would say mostly excited. I don't think the nerves have properly kicked in yet because it does still feel like I've got quite a long way to go. And, 8 weeks is still a good amount of training to get done. But it's funny, I think for races, I almost feel more, not nervous, but my focus is so much on just getting the training done. And I think, well, if I can get through the training and stay healthy and get some good sessions in, I'm not going to be that nervous for the race. Of course, you always have nerves on the start line, but for me, it's more about like getting all the training done, and then I can feel confident going into the race. So I think it's getting to the stage now where I feel like I'm in a good place fitness-wise. I've just got to stay sensible, keep building up slowly, and like remember 8 weeks, there's still a long way to go. And yeah, just keep kind of ticking each week off.
And just enjoying the process as well. It's so exciting. Did you see they put the Olympic rings on the Eiffel Tower? I was like, that is really cool.
Yeah, I saw that. It does. It looks so cool. I'm so excited it's just going to be, even when we were out there, you saw like signs of the Olympics all over the city. So it's going to be incredible. Even in Font Romeu, actually, there are these amazing deck chairs at the track, which are huge. They're like Road to Paris deck chairs. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, it's cool. I think the Olympics, it's just such a big thing, isn't it? That it ends up spreading. It's not just in the host city, it kind of like spreads out around the world. Now it's like the 8-week countdown, definitely be hearing about it more.
Yeah, for sure.
It's time to thank our sponsor for this episode, Veloforte.
Now, as our listeners will know by now, we are both big fans of using the Veloforte products in our training. And I have to say, Steph, I had a really hard session today, and all I could think about in those last couple of reps was having a malto shake at the end. The cold cinnamon and vanilla shake at the end of a hard session just hits differently.
Oh, it tastes so good, doesn't it? I've been absolutely loving the Energy Chews. They're a great alternative to gels, and I've been using them on those longer runs, especially in my training for Two Oceans. They came in very handy and they're so delicious. I love the apple and cinnamon flavour.
And the best bit is, because Veloforte uses only real food ingredients and nothing artificial, you can trust what you're putting in your body, and it digests so much better to synthetic alternatives.
And you can understand every ingredient on the back, which is not always the case with these types of products.
Thanks to Veloforte for supporting this podcast. And if you would like 30% off the Veloforte products, head to veloforte.com and use the code 5miles at checkout. And anyway, how is life in London? I know you've been mixing up your training and doing some speed work. So how's that been going?
Yeah, it's been a journey. It's kind of been ups and downs, just I'd say relearning, because this is the type of training I used to do a few years ago. So kind of relearning how to do it again, and just trusting the consistency over time kind of pays off. So I'd always said to my coach that after I did 2 oceans, I wanted to work on my speed over the summer, just because I think I've done probably about 5 years of back-to-back marathon blocks, and I've kind of had times in between where I wasn't necessarily training for a marathon, but it wasn't like I was training for anything else. So I've not done that specific speed work for a while, and I thought, you know what, as I get older as well, it's probably one of those things that you start losing. So I felt if I can run a bit faster over those shorter distances, 5 and 10K, then that's only going to help me run faster over the marathon and beyond, kind of making that marathon pace feel easier if my top end is faster. So yeah, it's been fun. I've been doing 1 track session a week, and it's very much out of my comfort zone. I feel like over the last few years I've got quite good at, every session you feel some sort of discomfort and pain, and that's kind of the point. But those long sessions that you do for marathon training is very much a pain where your legs are just so fatigued, but you have to keep on kind of pushing through that tired, heavy leg pain. Whereas on the track, if you're trying to kind of go your fastest, it's a completely different pain. It's like you start feeling the lactic burn, and you've got to trust that you can push through that. Whereas the first few sessions, I was definitely like, my head was like, oh no, like, don't do that. This is very painful, kind of hold back. And, it was definitely a bit of a mental battle as well. But I think it is getting easier as the weeks go on. And the last couple of weeks, it's kind of clicked a bit more. So yeah, it's a little bit of a journey, but it's kind of fun to mix things up as well when I'm not marathon training and focus on something that I'm not necessarily as good at.
Definitely. And as you say, it is so good to increase that top end, because like your marathon pace can then get closer to it. But I can definitely relate to the lactic. I have this little mantra that when it starts to burn, I just make myself say, like, I love lactic. I love lactic. And it's like my brain is actually going like, no, I hate this. But you have to tell yourself you love it. So what are your sessions looking like? Tell us what you've been doing. Give us some samples.
Yeah, I will. So I actually had quite an interesting one a couple of weeks ago, where it was a proper kind of speed focused session where we had really long recoveries. So I did it with one of my training partners, Sarah, and she's a 5K runner. So, she has the speed, but it was really interesting going into this one because we were both really nervous for it. And I was like, it made me feel more comfortable that she was nervous for it as well. And it wasn't just me kind of going into the unknown. But the session that we did then was 2 sets of 1200, 800, 400, 400, but every rep had a lap jog in between. So it was very long recoveries. Like, I'm not used to that, but the purpose of it, and my coach very much drilled this into me. He was like, this is meant to be fast. Like, it's going to feel uncomfortable, and that's how it's meant to feel, which actually did help, because during it I'd be like, okay, this hurts, but this is good. I want it to hurt. Whereas if I was holding back, I would think this isn't the purpose of the session. And I think that was actually a real confidence boost, because then I was pushing some paces that I hadn't done in a very long time. And it was coming out of that, I was like, oh, I can run that fast. Even though we had long recoveries, it's just kind of good to remind your legs that you can push those boundaries. And then, so the following session that I did last Tuesday, actually, which was more of a sort of a normal session, we did 4 by a K, and then we did 8 by 300 afterwards. So it meant that I went into that with the K reps were way faster than I've been running K reps for ages. And I definitely think having that really speedy session the time before just kind of planted the seed in my head that I could push through some boundaries that I didn't really think I could. So yeah, that went well last week. But what I would say is I have a lot to learn still, because this sort of training definitely leaves your legs feeling, well, for me anyway, like definitely more tired than other sessions. And the other thing I need to remember is I want to go into these sessions feeling fresh, because when you're marathon training, the point of marathon training is you're kind of doing things on tired legs. So you're going into sessions feeling a bit tired and you can kind of push through that. Whereas if you want to get faster, you actually kind of need to be going into the sessions with fairly fresh legs. And I'd say I haven't really looked at changing my mileage in the runs in between sessions. So what I've found actually, and this happened today, is I went into my session this morning feeling quite tired, not sleep-wise, just like my legs were sore. And I thought, God, I actually did do quite a lot the last few days. And I didn't really think about it because I'm in such a routine of, I've said it before, like, this is just what I do on a Monday, this is what I do on a Wednesday, just kind of doing my easy runs without thinking about it, not necessarily trying to hit a weekly mileage, just that's my routine. Whereas today was a good reminder, and I was like, I think I've done way too much going into a session where I want to be fast. So that's something I'm going to chat about with my coach later today, actually, just to kind of be like, okay, what sort of mileage should I be doing if I want to be faster? Because you can't have really high volume and really high intensity at the same time, because you're probably going to end up breaking. So yeah, that was a good learning point today.
That's such a good point. And I mean, if you look at, I think most shorter distance runners do a lot less mileage. So there's a very good reason for that. It'll be really interesting to see actually how you feel just taking, because you've done such high mileage for so long, even if you took your mileage down by 10 miles a week, I bet you'd feel so much fresher.
Yeah, I think so. And I think the last couple sessions had gone well because because I'd had busy things during the week, I'd actually run less. So I think I went into those fresher and they went well. So now it's like putting two and two together. Oh, that makes sense. I was running less that week and I had a good session because I went into it a lot fresher. So it's good to know. It's almost, as I said earlier, like it's relearning all these things, because when I used to do the speed work, my mileage was way less, so it's kind of getting used to a new routine, which is cool. And, like you said, I don't need to be doing that mileage right now because I'm not marathon training, and I can easily get back into it when I am marathon training. So yeah, very good learning.
And what about gym routine or drills? Are you building anything else in to kind of help your legs adjust to the speedy sessions?
So I mentioned to Aidan, who people will probably know who have listened to the podcast, who sets both of our strength sessions. He then adjusted my program a little bit. So I'm doing a lot more of those sort of plyometric exercises in the gym, still lifting heavy, but more exercises such as like the drop jumps. So you're kind of getting that reaction in your through your Achilles, and so when you push off, you have more force through the ground, which you really need when you're running faster. Those sort of exercises that really make you feel quite bouncy. So like the pogo jumps and all of that, where when you're doing them, they don't necessarily feel hard, but they have a real benefit to them. It's a very different feeling to kind of lifting the heavy weights, which also still have a purpose. I don't necessarily do more drills other than that. I always do drills as part of my warm-up before a session, but I've not really changed my routine there. But yeah, maybe kind of doing a separate drill session could be quite helpful too, you just want to feel a bit more bouncy, I think, when you're doing those track sessions.
I think a lot of it is just getting that spring, isn't it? Which, as you say, in marathon training is not something, because your legs are often tired, you don't always feel that springy. Whereas for the fast sessions, you really want to. I think a lot of people struggle with going back to the shorter, faster work, especially after the marathon. It's such a common thing that you kind of feel like you've lost your speed. So I think it's so interesting. It's going to be so useful for people to hear like how you've done it. And actually, I know you said it's been a bit of a journey, but given that you spent the last 5 years doing the long training, it seems to have come back so quickly. I mean, it's only been, like a couple of months, even less than that, a month or so.
Yeah, it's probably been about like 4 or 5 weeks of this. Yeah, and what I would say is with this stuff, it's so much easier doing it with other people. So the first couple of weeks when I started doing this sort of training again, I did sessions on my own. And it was quite demoralising and mentally tough, because I had kind of no one to measure, not to measure myself against, but like just to share the workload. Whereas since then, I've training with a couple of the girls that are in my training group, and it's just so helpful because we can share some of the work, and then even if they're faster than me for some of it, it's just useful having someone kind of up ahead to drag you along, because you don't want the gap to get ridiculously big. And yeah, just having people around you definitely helps you push harder in those sort of sessions.
And what about mindset? Because I think with the speed work and also on the track is a bit different for you. I know you haven't done much track in the last few build-ups, so what are some tips you can give on mindset and how you crack that?
I feel, and I don't think this is just me, I think it's quite a common feeling, is before track sessions compared to road sessions or sessions you do in the park, I definitely feel more nervous before them, and I'm kind of thinking about them more. And I think the reason for that is that track splits don't lie. You know, it's a measured distance. You know exactly what your 400 meter split means. There's no kind of, you can't just say, oh no, actually I was probably like a second faster because my watch was lying to me of GPS. It's like, you don't need GPS on the track. It's literally measured for you. So I think you kind of go into those sessions knowing the kind of splits you want to run, and it's easy to get a bit caught up in putting pressure on yourself to hit exactly those targets. But again, as goes with any session, you know, it always depends on kind of how you feel on the day as well. You're not always going to be at your best, but you just need to kind of put in your best effort. And I did speak to my sports psychologist about this last week, and it wasn't a huge issue. Like I said, kind of the sessions have been getting better anyway, but I just mentioned to him that I definitely felt like I go into them a bit more nervous. And even during the sessions, it's because of the laps, it's kind of easy to mentally switch off sometimes. Like for a 400, I'm good because I'm like, okay, one lap hard, just keep going. But then when it gets to like, I know, 1200s or mile reps, you're like, you have to kind of stay really switched on to keep the pace going for that long. And I was saying, I can switch off quite a lot. So one of the things he said to me is like, what's the one thing you can control going into this, rather than worrying about what your pace is and if you're going to suddenly slow down or whatever. And I was like, well, I guess it's kind of like the attitude and the effort I give it on the day. And he was like, yeah, the one thing you can control is just giving it your best on the day. And no matter how that ends up, like, what's the point in worrying about that? All you can control is just doing your best. And so actually that, it kind of felt like a bit of not a weight off my shoulders. I don't think it's like been weighing me down, but it was like, oh, that's so simple. Why am I worrying about other things? Like if I just go into this session thinking, just run your best in each rep. And it's like, that's quite easy to do. And I now, the last couple of sessions, kind of during each rep, I'm thinking, run my best. And it's kind of a nice thing to think about, because you're not as worried about the outcome of it. It's more just process driven, which we've spoken about a lot.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. It's funny, I always get way more nervous for my track sessions too. And I think you're right. It's because there's no hiding. There's no thinking, okay, well, that mile rep was a little bit uphill, or, you know, you've got the slight deviations of the road or whatever. It's literally, you know, your second to the second what you're running each 400. But I do also think that's kind of, it is good for you to go through those mental battles. I think I get a bigger sense of accomplishment after a really good track session, because it feels more daunting and then you've achieved it.
Yeah, definitely agree. And just, I mean, as I mentioned, the pain you kind of put yourself through during it, it's kind of like you do rep after rep, where at the end of each rep, you're like hands on knees, like really out of breath. That's the other thing I've noticed. Like I get so out of breath doing track reps, which I don't really get on the road. Like I push myself hard on the road, and like, yes, you're kind of out of breath, but like it takes me a lot longer to recover between track reps, where I'm like literally want to have my hands on knees for ages. So I find that interesting. So I think, yeah, getting through those, you definitely think like, wow, I put myself through a lot there and I managed to come out the other end. So you do feel proud of yourself.
Okay, so for any of our listeners who are also thinking about stepping down in the distance or giving track a go, getting some speed back, what would be your 3 top tips to cracking it?
Okay, well, I can't say I'm a huge expert yet, but what I would say from experience is, number 1, consistency And, you know, just committing to one speed session a week. You don't need to be doing like, you know, you think, oh, I need to get faster, and then suddenly running like loads of days of the week really fast. Like, just commit to one session a week where you are kind of pushing those boundaries, doing that speed work and staying consistent with it week after week. As I said, the first week that I did this, it was really hard and I felt really slow. But you've just got to commit to it because your body will adapt and mentally you'll get used to it as well. So yeah, number one, kind of consistency and once a week. Number two is not starting too fast your session. I think on the track it's really easy to go off too fast, but you'd rather kind of hold yourself back a little bit within reason for the first few reps, knowing that you're going to be able to complete this session and then build into it. And then, you know, you'd rather have a progressive session than getting slower, which I've definitely experienced. So it's just kind of being sensible, and then you'll learn over the weeks what your body's capable of. So you'll know, actually, you know what, I want to run each lap in a certain amount of time, but let's actually start a couple seconds slower per lap for the first rep and see how that feels, and then build into it. So I think it's just, not going off too fast, because it's very easy to do and you'll pay the price. And the last one is probably the psychological tip that, you know, just go into it not worrying about the outcome, but just saying that you're going to give it your best today, and that's all you can control. So not worrying about anything else.
I love it. Just commit.
Just commit.
Okay, well, we will see in a few weeks on our next catch up how the speed work has been progressing.
I'm looking forward to it, and I'm also looking forward to seeing how the rest of your altitude training camp goes. So I'm sure the next time we catch up, we will both be fitter and faster.
Let's hope so. Thanks for joining us for 5 Miles Easy.
See you next time.